On this webinar, How Deep is Your Love for Authors? There's meant to be theme tune music in the background. As I said, I was trying to share music through Zoom, but this is more difficult than I had expected. Apologies about that. This session is a repeat of a conference session that we did during the SSP, Society of Scholarly Publishers conference in Boston before the summer. And unfortunately, there were some technical difficulties and the session wasn't recorded. So we've decided to rerun this as a webinar and record it this time. So thank you for joining, or if you're watching the recording later, thanks very much. As I said, it's recorded. There's also time for question and answers at the end. So please put your questions or your comments in the chat and we'll get to them at the end. Overall, we're talking about author experience, the different aspects, different needs, depending on whether you're an independently publishing organization or if you're publishing via publishing partner, can be a different experience. So we dive into different aspects of that, including topics about listening to your authors, assessing your workflows, knowing how to communicate and engage with your authors. So I've got an exciting panel here that we joined me live as well in Boston. We've got Colleen Scollins from Clark and Esposito, David Haber from the American Society for Microbiology, and Rory Williams from Rockefeller University Press. And we'll do the same. Oh, yeah, this is how our session in Boston went. You have your plan about, planning to introduce yourself, your motivation, describing all the talk. But we had a lot of technical difficulties, including internet cutting out, the laptop, running out of battery, forgetting to introduce yourself. So, which I've done again. So, yeah, I'm hoping this will go a little bit more smoothly from a technical aspect. I'm not sure. We'll see how it goes. In terms of an outline for the session, we'll do some quick introductions. So I'm Romy Beard, Head of Public Relations at Kronos Hub, and I'll be moderating the session today. And then I'll pass on to my panelists in a second about introductions. And then we'll use our survey that we put together. It's a quiz, really, that you'll be able to do live through Menti. And we use this as a structure to guide the webinar to talk about different aspects of author experience. And you'll get the chance to rate your organization across those different ideas that we're touching on. And then for each of those survey question panel, we'll discuss the topic in question. So we will use this as a structure to the session. And there will be time at the end for your questions and different topics that we might not have touched on that you want to ask the panel about. So please put those in the Q&A or the chat. So I'll hand over to Colleen to introduce herself. And in the meantime, you can head over to menti.com and use the code 68080922 to join the live quiz.
Great. I'm going to introduce myself and the session by introducing what actually author experience is. So I'm Colleen Scollins, and I lead the marketing and customer experience practice at Clark and Esposito. We're a management consulting firm that works with publishers, associations, B2B media company, education companies. So what is author experience? Every day, your prospective authors engage with you in various ways. They receive marketing campaigns encouraging authorship. There's editorial outreach. They submit their manuscript. They go through peer review process. They get published and so on. In each one of those interactions and the time in between, the authors are forming perceptions, positive, negative, neutral, about their experiences. And author experience is the cumulative effect of all of those perceptions. So in essence, an author experience is how an author thinks about you. And it's a complicated thing. It's about their journey, it's about the touch points, it's about your brand, but ultimately it's about their sentiment towards your brand. And organizations are looking to advance author experience maturity. And in doing so, the goal is to increase author satisfaction and in turn get more author submissions and more author pre-submissions. And the thing I think I would say, just as one last point of introducing it, is author experience doesn't sit in a vacuum. It's part of customer experience. Authors may also be readers, probably are. If you're an association, be members, event attendees. So it doesn't sit in a vacuum. It's part of your larger customer experience agenda. But as we know, authors have unique processes they go through. It's a unique relationship we as publishers have with authors. And so it is important to think of your total customer experience, but also really to hone in on that of your authors. So that's what author experience is.
Thanks, Colleen. Dave, over to you.
Yeah, I'm David Haber. I'm the operations person at the American Society for Microbiology, and I just want to say that I'm really fascinated by this view of author experience as a driver for process change, because it's something we kind of forget sometimes. And I find it's a really good way of stepping back and looking at the overall publishing process. And if you take the author perspective rather than maybe an editor perspective or a peer review perspective or a reader perspective and think about your process as a whole, it really adds insight in potential ways to make things more smooth, quicker, maybe even cheaper if you're lucky. So I find it a really interesting way of looking at the entire publishing process. So that's why I'm here. Rory.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Roy Williams. I'm the Director of Communications and Marketing over at Rockefeller University Press. And Dave, you said it best. It really is. It's great to take a step back and look at the overall process, and that's what our organization is focused on. Just to give you an idea of what perspective we're coming from, we publish 4 journals, 3 hybrid journals, and 1 open access journal. Smaller portfolio of 890 articles in the life sciences. And also, what's I think unique about our editorial structure is that we have in-house scientific editors working with academic editors to support authors throughout the entire process. So other things to note too, we're on the Silverchair platform and EJP as our submission system.
Thanks.
Happy to be here.
Thanks, Rory. So I hope everyone's managed to find their way over to menti.com, either on your phone or your laptop, and stick in the code at the top. So we'll get started with our first question, which just to gauge your how much you think about authors. How often do you think about your authors? Just the right amount. We should focus on them more. And oh gosh, I haven't thought about them in a while. So I can see some answers, and you can see them as well on the shared screen. So good to see that's working. Just to remind you, on Menti, you have to click the submit answer button after you've selected the answer, so that it would go through. So obviously nobody isn't thinking about authors at all, which is great. I think when we did this in Boston, there was actually a couple like that. You can always focus on them more. So expecting to see most of the answers in there. And then there's some that are very sure that they think just the right amount about authors. So it'll be interesting to see how you rate yourself at the end after we've talked about various things. So I'm going to move that along now to the next question that we'll dive into a little bit more. How do you check what your authors say and do? And here you can select all that applies. So we can look at things like collecting feedback from authors through surveys or interviews, looking at author submission and publication data. So do authors come back when they publish again? Do they publish more than once in your journals? And if you're looking at publication history, so the kind of hard data, how many times they submit. Checking results of author marketing efforts and campaign and how successful they were and where they led. And then the last one is tracking author effort across the publishing workflow. How easy is it to complete a submission? How time to sign a license, for example. So quite a wide mix that we have here. Rory, do you want to start us off with the discussion around this?
Yeah, sure. It's good to see that the surveys, that is actually the largest amount of respondents so far. Our journals also have post-publication surveys where we're asking for feedback on the editorial, process, the production process, the review process, and then we discuss that as a team on a regular basis. We're also looking at a monthly dashboard of submission and publication data and discussing that as part of the team too. But we are looking at the survey data, which we think is extremely important.
Oh, I hear the noise. What about you, Colleen?
Yeah, I would chime in. It's great to see people using a myriad of techniques. Just to call out a couple points, we sometimes encounter organizations that collect feedback, but don't disseminate it through the organization and talk about it. So good, Rory, to hear that you sit as a publishing steering committee or team and talk about the numbers and what they mean. That's really, really important. Market research should be, it tells you something, but it should be actionable, right? The idea is to understand how to improve it. And I would talk a little bit at the one at the end about sort of behavioral data. I think there's a lot that can be gleaned from better sort of behavioral and touch point data, whether that's from marketing campaigns or the author submission process. We have a tendency sometimes to think of authors as a homogeneous group of people, but they're from different countries. They may or may not be members. They're in different career stages, different subdisciplines. They don't all behave the same. And so the more intelligence we can have on them as cohorts of individuals, the smarter we can adapt our processes in marketing.
Yeah, I think it's interesting as well to, on the one hand, check with authors to ask them, but then also look at what they say versus what they do might not exactly be the same thing. So something we do at Chronosub is time tracking, checking how long does it take an author to do this step of the workflow. And if it's really quick, well, that's a sign that it's smooth and it's not complicated. On the other hand, if it takes longer, there might be other reasons. Doesn't necessarily mean, it could be like an outlier who wants to read the entire license before they sign it and check it with their colleagues, and therefore it takes 3 hours rather than 3 minutes. So for all of these, I guess there's outliers, but certainly I think that speed gives you an indication if something works smoothly. The other thing I wanted to add, you said, Colleen, about obviously acting on the information that you collect. There's no point in collecting all this and then doing nothing about it. Do you have any advice on what the best way is to go about doing that and getting consensus? I mean, I've spoken to some people who said, well, sometimes different departments can actually read, they look at the same result and they understand something completely different and they see different action points to get that consensus across an organization.
Yeah, I think some organizations formalize where experience sits, and we can talk about structures later if people have questions on that. But irregardless, I do think you need somebody that owns this point person, someone that's leading the charge, and their job is to bring people together and to get that consensus. And that person shouldn't be wearing their functional hat. They should be wearing the experience hat, looking across all functions, and also prioritizing the actions. Some of the fixes may be quick wins. Some of the fixes may involve investment, may involve time. There's some really big trade-offs. We recommend what we call kind of an author experience sort of priority register, right? So you're coming together, you're understanding the results, you're coming up with an action plan. There's a formalized process to score and prioritize the things you're going to do. And then somebody is charged with taking that forward. Things tend to not move if there isn't somebody charged with moving it forward. And that could be, if you're a small organization, that can be 1/8 of someone's role, but it's clear that this person is charged with moving the agenda forward.
Mm-hmm.
I think I might also jump in and just say for surveys too, it's important to go back and revise those. Like we've revised our survey a number of times because we realized some of the questions that we were asking just aren't applicable at this point in time, or they're not actionable, right? So I think it's important to not only have these post-publication surveys, but also to keep in mind, what are some of the questions that you can remove to make that process even quicker for the author.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really good point. And I think we tend to think of just the formal survey post-publication, which is great. But we've got the ability on our platforms to pop up surveys at any time and to target them and to ask questions like, are these instructions clear? Right? And so I think it's about being really sort of thoughtful about all the ways you can capture feedback.
And then also segmentation, I guess you want to ask, turning authors
100%.
questions than first-time authors.
Right, the author instructions exactly might be clear to someone later in the career, but not someone earlier. Or maybe clear to someone where English is their first language, but not to someone where it's not, right? And you want to understand those nuances.
Yeah. I think some publishers are looking at like quite smart tracking and asking the same questions all the way through at different stages, like submission, through to publication, and just being consistent about that. What about complaints? Where do they sit with what authors say and do, and are they formalized, and do people act on them in terms of improving things?
Yeah, from my perspective, complaints are important, but I think Rory hit this really well. You have to talk amongst yourselves to make sure that you're not taking a complaint and treating it as like DEFCON 5, when really the complaint is actually about something else that happened earlier in the process.
Right.
But this one thing they've decided this is really annoying too. So trying to separate out the actual complaint from what potentially was the cause is really important. That comes through communication as a team that I think goes to both Colleen and Rory's point about, talking and sharing.
Yeah.
There was, Romy, just a question about what I meant by functional hat versus experience hat. And what I meant by that is to improve author experience, there may be marketing actions. Maybe the communications could be clearer. There might be operational actions. Maybe the submission process is full of friction. There might be digital actions. Maybe the platform isn't working quite right with the submission button. There might be editorial actions. Maybe the outreach editorial is conducting could be better. Author experience impacts every single function in the organization, or most functions in the organization. And so if you just looked at it from a marketing hat, or you just looked at it from an operations hat, you'll miss out on all of the things that have to come together. Some organizations have a customer experience role that usually when you do sits in marketing, they kind of go together. Doesn't have to. I think my point is whomever is doing it in the organization needs to be agnostic of whatever function they sit in and championing for the author, not just thinking about the marketing or the operation or the editorial needs.
Yeah, definitely can be some strategic adjustments to be done. And is the author more important? Is, my perspective more important? Share that as a goal. Anything else you want to add before we move on to the next question? By the way, I can't see questions in the Q&A while I'm sharing this screen. I can see it later. So yeah, thanks for reading that out, Colleen.
Yep.
Right, I'll move us on to the next question, which is about soliciting new authors. This should be also a select all question, segmented in personalized author marketing, personal outreach, or spray and pray. We've got answers coming in here. Thought spray and pray would be the most popular just because it sounds good. Dave, is this something that you think people should do in combination with the others?
I think it comes back to data and understanding what the data you are seeing means. This goes for the spray and pray method, it goes for segmentation, and it goes to personal outreach. You can't determine the success of anything if you don't understand what the data is saying. And if you're not communicating and talking across functionally amongst yourselves internally, then it's really hard to figure out the action that makes the most sense, right? And we can do all these spectacular things, but if your marketing team has data over here and they just go off and do some stuff thinking that that's going to grow author submission without talking to editorial, for example, you're not, their data point could mean something completely different from an editorial perspective. And I think trying to understand that and talking about it and being clear that these are the things we're trying to get at before you start any sort of campaign or any sort of questioning determining what those like key metrics are you want to get out of this and sharing that and making sure there's agreement is really, really important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, both the blue and the pink are really important. You need you need editorial outreach and you need improved marketing. I think what I would say is if you only have $1 to spend, I think that personal editorial outreach is really, really important. In terms of spray and pray, that just means you're sending messages out with no segmentation. You don't know who you're sending it to, and you hope that it works. I'm just answering the spray and pray question that came up. So, I think what I always say is you need to get your marketing better. But your personal outreach, editors looking at bibliometric analysis, other data points, and personally reaching out and forming relationships with prospective authors, peer reviewers, etc. I cannot stress how important that is. And that is not solely an editorial activity. It requires a really close partnership with marketing to understand the messaging, the flow. It needs really, as David pointed out, really, really good data. The lines between functions in this author experience world are blurring a little bit. And it requires, to your good point, David, just like excellent communication and good underpinning infrastructures underneath it all, right? Data, analytics, messaging. You have to be much more disciplined, I think, to get it right. But I can't underestimate the power of the personal editorial relationship. It's really powerful when done well.
I think the only thing that I'll add here too is with regard to spray and pray. I think everyone should be focused on moving away from that, because especially if it's coming from your lists, right? If you're spraying and you're getting a high bounce rate or not a lot of opens, that's going to affect your sender reputation, which is going to affect your ability to get into inboxes. In addition to that, these are lists that you've built over time. These are individuals that you've met at meetings, and it's taken a lot of effort to get their information into your database. So if they flag your email as spam and no longer receive your emails, then you just lost a really important lead and you just lost all of that work. So yeah, I think at this point we're also focused on just moving away from spray and pray and getting a little bit more personal with our outreach.
Such a good point, Rory. We often see declining engagement rates in emails as a problem.
Yeah.
People are looking to fix, and it's almost always because it's spray and pray. It's not targeted enough. It's not segmented enough, and so people are receiving too many irrelevant communications. So such a good point.
Yeah, and I guess the three sit in like spray and pray is the kind of widest reach. Segmentation is still automating it in some way, but making it targeted. And then you have the very personal one-to-one emails, and not everyone can do the personal one, perhaps manpower, or depending on how many authors you want to gain. So I guess it depends also on the size of the organization and what you're able to do. All right, let's move on to the next question, which is about how frictionless are your processes for your authors. In terms of options we've given you here, we automate things that are appropriate to make it easier for authors. We are making progress, but still have some issues in our workflows, and it's a rocky road with many obstacles. Yeah, I think something that I'll start us off here that I wanted to talk about is one is automation versus manual workflows. I have a lot of discussion with publishers that used to do things manually and it works up to a certain level, and then for example, to do with OA processing, it expands, and then it's worth automating that. And some things can be automated and would make sense, but others you want to keep it manual. You want to write that personal email if that's the better response for example, dealing with complaints or license changes. There's larger publishers might want to automate that, where smaller publishers, if it's a smaller number, you want to deal with it on a kind of personal level, because you also build that relationship and keep that relationship. The other thing that I mentioned is about logical workflow sequence, and what we recommend is looking at your workflows, all your interactions with authors, and making sure they're consistent and you're not asking for same things at different times. Like one example that I give is signing publishing agreements. Some publishers ask authors to sign, let's say, a copyright transfer agreement during the submission process, even during the peer review process. And then later, if they decide to publish open access, they ask them to sign another license that overwrites it. So you're essentially doing the same thing, but at 2 different points. So I would look at your workflows to try and streamline that and make sure that you're not repeating things, and do it at the right time rather than do it too early and then have to do it again. I think, Dave, you were going to say something around
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up something because I find it really interesting in a good way to enter this kind of thinking about workflows. Whenever you have something new, some new initiative, it's an opportunity to think about author experience. And sometimes we forget that. So for example, we have launched into this alt text, which is an accessibility thing for readers, right? Like you want a way for people who use screen readers to be able to understand figures, and alt text is a way to do this, right? So it's a reader initiative at its core, but it involves authors. So the traditional way to approach this is just to say, authors, give us some alt text. But we knew from experience, if we just do that, we're going to cause confusion. We're going to cause another roadblock. We're going to cause stress in our author base. So instead, we approached it backwards, right? The idea here is finding the right spot to do an action. And so what we decided is, because we are not experts at writing alt text in-house, we also realized that authors want to see what we are doing and how we are enhancing their content. What we decided to do is build a step so that we have a service that produces alt text. Authors can review it. We are tracking the changes they make to it, and we're giving them clear guidelines right at that point of what we're doing and why we're doing it. And we're collecting feedback immediately, both in the changes they make and in their experience of it through surveying, to help inform us and answer the higher level question of, is this the appropriate spot to do this? Do we want to move this earlier in the workflow? Do we want to get AI involved, right? All those things are options, but by doing it this way, we're able to understand what's happening and help teach authors what's going on and why we're doing it, and how, for readers who use screen reading technology, this is important, but you may not be able to comprehend or even understand what it is you have to do to make it easy for them, right? So this is a way to sort of pull apart that from a new initiative perspective, find the spot, get data, and then rethink it and maybe change it going forward. And it's hard to do that with already existing processes, but if you take that kind of approach with things new, it lays the groundwork going forward. So that's what we're trying right now. So far, it's been an interesting experience. We've gotten some really good information. So
Like, don't make me do this. Why are you doing this?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Hey, Romy, I'm just going to
Yeah.
interject with an answer to a question that came in just for some contextualization. There was a question about what is personalization? Is it just including someone's name? You know, dear David, dear Rory. And that is personalization, but often when we're talking about targeting and segmented personalization, we're talking more about tailoring content to an individual. So instead of sending one email to everyone for a particular campaign, being really thoughtful about it. So for example, if you're soliciting a special issue, just to use that as an example, or collection in a really focused area, spray and pray might be you send it to your whole database. Personalization or segmentation would just be tailoring it to the people that show an affinity to that topic. It could be career stage, it could be role, it could be geography. So when we're talking about segmentation and targeting, the personalization then could be pulling in recommended content, pulling in dynamic content so the message changes. inserting their profile attribute. Those are all the things that might make the email or the web ad or whatever we're talking about more personalized. When we talk about spray and pray, it's really moving away from, if only 75 people are interested in that email, just send it to 75 people. Don't send it to your entire database. That's really what we're sort of talking about.
So you're still not handwriting each email, but you're using that information to pull together an automatic text.
You know, marketing technology, particularly sort of email systems, the more modern ones, you build in merge parameters and you set them up. And the email I'm getting is different than the email David is getting. It's the same email. It's just building merge parameters that are pulling in maybe my profile attribute, maybe my birthday, maybe my submission, maybe my manuscript.
Yeah.
It could be different images. They're kind of assembled dynamically.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying organizations need to go all the way there, but at a minimum, be really thoughtful of who you're sending your campaigns to. And then, and just in terms of this question, if I could interject, the point I would make, we wrote a blog article at Clark and Esposito last month on systems thinking. And I would just say, you need to apply systems thinking. You need to break down your processes, and you need to make sure you understand what system is best in breed, fit in purpose for the particular piece of your workflow. It may be that it's one system. It may be that it's 2 or 3 systems. The world of technology has changed a lot, that you can plug things in a little bit easier. And so I would encourage everyone to think a little more systems thinking first.
Thanks, Colleen. Let's go back to the topic of communication. You've touched on that with the email question that you answered. How good are you at setting and communicating expectations to authors, which is really about communication to authors? First, we have send updates all the time. Authors know exactly where they are in the process. Proactive communication is limited to when the author has to do something. And we like to keep our authors guessing. And then there's probably things in between. We touched earlier on, like, information is there for authors when they log into the peer review system, but we're not blasting them with notifications. So it's not as proactive, but if they want to be kept informed, it's there. So it's still proactive in some ways. And one of the things we wanted to talk about a little bit, and you've mentioned the systems thinking, is about decoupling those emails from systems. How do you envisage that, Colleen?
So email tools, they're called ESP, email system providers. Sometimes they come with marketing automation platforms, are really good at email communication. That's what they have to do. And there are lots of really cool advances in email digital communication. Author submission systems are never going to be able to keep up with those kind of developments in email communication. And so we're big advocates, or I personally am a big advocate of, I call it liberating your author emails. How do you get them out of your sort of submission system? How do you trigger the event, the thing that needs to be said, and have emails that can be delivered? And by why would you do that? They can look better, they can be more personalized, the analytics is greater. But one of the other really big benefits is it can be difficult if you've got, I don't know, 10 journals with 10 different policies to keep updating all of your emails. Email system providers are just built to do that. Like, it's easy to upload across templates. There are a million reasons why you should think about doing emails outside of your author submission platform. So very big believer in that. I know, David, I know you're on my team with that.
Yes, I'm on Team Colleen, 100%. Well, and just to tack on to this, and I know Rory probably wants to talk about this too. Like, currently our method is, if you have a task, we'll send you an email, or if we're notifying you of something because of some action, we'll send you an email. But we get questions all the time. How long is X going to take? Why haven't I heard from you in 84 weeks? Gosh forbid, like, that actually happens. But like, that kind of thing partially is driven by our approach, which is we ask an author to do something, or some task has been accomplished, therefore messaging goes out, rather than this is the entire process. These are the things to expect. And trying to navigate those two things sometimes are in conflict, I think. I don't know.
Yeah, I do think if you tell authors how long something is expected to take, they're not going to be as impatient. Like if they know it's, 27 days, they're not going to email you on day 15. Oh, why haven't I heard? So I
Yeah.
guess it's a combination of those things.
Yeah.
And I think it's contextual too, meaning for certain papers or certain journals, they expect more time because the editorial process is different, right? And so it's not always you have to be sort of the fastest. It's about what's appropriate for your portfolio and communicating that clearly. And what, and if it is a little bit longer, why it's a little bit longer, right? There might be very good reasons why.
Mhm. Rory, do you want to add anything here before we move on? I realize the time is moving along.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, we're experiencing the same thing that David has mentioned. Our processes are very much the same in that, yeah, I mean, authors are able to log into the submission system, see what tasks have been accomplished, what's next. Also, the authors are receiving a combination of automated and manually triggered emails from the managing editors, and also the managing editors are available throughout the entire process, as are the scientific editors. So I do think for us, we're doing pretty good in our communications efforts with authors. I mean, of course, it could always be better. Everything could be better, but I do feel that our UP is pretty strong in this regard.
Excellent, thank you. We've got 2 more questions to go through. The first one here is number 6. Do you have author engagement initiatives that create a sense of community with your organizations, such as a social media strategy, author community, doing in-person meetings? We talked about that a little bit already in terms of soliciting the authors during events, running online events like webinar and online discussion, and author community platform. And again, this is like all that applies. So you can select more than one answer, and hopefully people will do a variety of these things. Dave, as a society, how much of this do you do in terms of webinars, community platforms?
We experiment. We're dipping our toes in. We do some webinars. We have just started trying to run journal-led scientific meetings, which is a new interesting thing we're experimenting with. So if anyone's in China in a couple weeks, there's one there, so go. It's gonna be awesome. But it's been an interesting sort of method for us in the sense that journals teams traditionally at ASM don't have experience running meetings, so this is like an all new thing for us. And we're learning quite a bit about both the kind of scientific meeting that might make sense, and then what to expect in terms of like, is there a direct correlation to author growth, or is this just a service to the community? And that's good too. But understanding what your driver is really important, and being flexible enough to, change your mind, right? Like that's okay too.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Rory? Have you been doing any webinars or?
So yeah, I was going to say, during the SSP meeting, I was going to say that our ideas of webinars and hosting events, just as Dave said, it would be new to us. We have held events previously, but not on a regular basis. So that would be new to us. And initially it was met with a little bit of skepticism, just because of the amount of effort involved, as well as the amount of other publishers out there offering essentially the same thing, and thinking, okay, is there a little bit of virtual meeting fatigue? That said, opinions have changed since SSP. It's only been a couple months. So I'm pleased to say that we are looking into offering webinars soon. But yeah, as far as some of these other areas though, too, yeah, we do have a social media strategy. We still see, and I think this is true for other publishers too, that the highest engagement and traffic that we get is from X, but we are still active on Facebook as well as Instagram and LinkedIn. You know, we gave Mastodon a try and we're still kind of keeping an eye on it, but I mean, hopefully we see more engagement there. We're also keeping an eye on Blue Sky as well, but X still seems to be the driver of traffic. So we'll see how that shapes up though.
The only, I mean, I'll make a small comment here to not derail. The only thing I like to say about this is you may have had a social media strategy that worked and worked really well. And you may have one that works really well for your society and your publications. But when you're thinking about author engagement and your editors as ambassadors and being part of the community, you may need a different social media strategy.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is down to how your editors are really going to engage on social media. So if you've got an editor-in-chief or a social media editor for a particular journal who's going to really cultivate community on that channel, that may be an argument for that journal to have a social media channel that wouldn't have been an argument in the old world. So we always tell, look at your strategy, depending your social media strategy, depending on your goals.
Yeah.
And there was a question in the chat about best practices for author community platforms. I would just say, I would go with caution. Community platforms, any kind of community is really, really difficult to do well. It requires a fair amount of engagement. And so you need to make sure that you've got the resources to cultivate, to nurture that engagement. Now, if we're talking about like a front-facing place where authors can see their metrics and it's quite like it's more of a dashboard, I think that's a different kind of thing. But if you're talking about a community where you want people to come and chat, it requires an awful lot of care and feeding. And so, really proceed with caution that the investment's going to be worth the benefit.
Yeah, and it looks like one of the respondents does have an author community platform. And so
Yeah.
Wish we could hear from that person now,
Yeah.
how they're, what their experience.
Yeah.
And I think also in that white paper too from Kronos Hub that came out, there was the mention of the company of biologists. They have
Yeah, and
Yeah.
also Jennifer Regala talked about that. We did a webinar early in the year, I think March time, which was about engaging authors outside of the publication process. And they both, she also talked about, I mean, she's now with Wolters Kluwer. She was with Urological Society before that, and they ran a platform. And I think they did things like promoting published content from authors. So they would see that, they would have like kind of lay language text where people could go and write and promote, so create that community between authors, and then also promote webinars and events and pull into social media activity in that one central place. The
Frontiers too, Romy, I would say they have an author community of sorts.
Yeah, I've not looked at that one. I've looked at this one, and I've looked at the Company of Biology where they have like separate one. And I guess it depends also on how niche your content is that you're publishing. Obviously, urology is just urology content. If you're, a big publisher and it's a bit more multidisciplinary, it would be difficult to do.
Yeah, I think it can be worthwhile. Just I would really recommend a thoughtful, considerate business case that puts resources in to sort of again feed and nurture it.
It's a lot of work. Yeah,
it's a lot of work.
Yeah. All right, let's jump to our next question for you to answer. Do you recognize all the roles an author has with your organization, and are you making strategic connections? So we're talking about here authors that are also reviewers, it might be editors, and how you can coordinate that. So we dance in harmony, we look at the data in a connected way, we're taking dance lessons, we make some connections, but there's more to do, and we step on each other's toes inadvertently. We're largely siloed. Oh, that's a very popular answer there. Colleen, do you want to take it away with this one?
Goodness, yes, this is one I'm incredibly passionate about. As I said in my introduction, authors don't exist in vacuums. They're also readers, peer reviewers, members, event attendees, and so on. And if you think about sort of the brands you engage with outside of scholarly publishing, they don't, a clothing store doesn't, treat you as two different people if you buy shoes and you buy hats, right? Like you're a human being that has multiple relationships. And I think that associations have such an a unique advantage because of their connection to the community. And the fact that many associations are still siloed, I think is just a tremendous opportunity. You can't achieve author experience in a really great way if you're siloed. You can't have audience engagement in a really great way if you're siloed. And I realize this is controversial. It doesn't mean organizational designs need to completely change, but organizations need to come together around the customer, their data, their sort of messaging, their kind of campaign planning. And that's just one level. At a second level, they should be thinking, as David said, ASM is about programs and how they can connect across meetings and journals, etc. The real beauty and magic and value is when you bust the silos and you think at the association level. And it's hard. And I would say in the last 2 to 3 years, we're really seeing some of the progressive associations move in that way. And it's super exciting.
That's promising. Dave, Rory, anything you want to add to this before we finish up with the quiz?
Sure. I'll go first, Dave, then you.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think, for us, we're doing a little bit of all of the above, right? We're taking steps to dance in harmony, and I think one of the projects that we actually have coming up that I'm really looking forward to is a review of the author journey organization-wide. So in a couple of weeks, we're actually coming together and looking at ways to optimize each of the steps of the author journey with members from all the departments in mixed groups. So I'm really looking forward to that discussion. And I do think that'll lead to a lot of great ideas and also kind of get us closer to dancing in harmony. So that would just be a recommendation for others to consider.
Yeah, I will hop on that bandwagon with you, Rory. I think that is definitely one of the key first steps. The other thing that we're doing at ASM, I think that helps, is making clearer our purpose as an association. Traditionally, we were a membership organization, and so that meant certain things for certain silos of the organization, and it kind of reinforced that silo. I don't know what the verb of silo is, but it reinforced the segments and the verticals. ASM changing that, and it's focusing on the science produced and promoting the science produced. And with that focus, by necessity, it means that we have to, not step on each other's toes. It means we have to understand what each group is doing and participate in what they're doing. We can't say any longer that, oh, that's their responsibility, that's their accountabilities. No, it's ours. And that's a different strategic model, I think, for an association where it's traditionally, oh, members, let's just look out for our members. Let's promote their careers. Let's offer them benefits. But when the benefit is to the science, it's a different mentality.
Yeah. I like that, David. I like science first. I also like audience first. Like, what does your community want? How do you serve them? If you're doing a really good job serving your community, your membership will grow.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I would also recommend what Rory was saying in terms of doing a workshop where you get everyone involved in the organization. We did that together with ACS as well, with different people from editorial and operations and production to really do some line of blue sky thinking. What is the ideal author experience? Where do I want to go before you do developments? And with the new author dashboard that we've launched, the kind of next step there is to bring in not just authors, but also the different roles and how you serve them and the different elements that how they interact with papers, not just as author but as reviewer, to kind of streamline that experience. And I think there's a lot of talk right now about author experience specifically, and I think that's the starting point, but then leads on from that. Well, how is it for reviewers? How is it for for readers for the other roles and how they're connected.
You also have a treasure trove of data. The people that are submitting event abstracts are really good targets for authors. You may be trying to get an institution to subscribe and you've got an editor-in-chief that's affiliated with it. When organizations start to understand their data and the connectivity, it opens up a lot of opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, this is your chance to like overall rate your author experience and determine how deep your love for authors really is. And then we've got some lifestyle quiz recommendations depending on what your answer is. It's as deep as the ocean, it flows like a river, or it's a puddle of mud. So we had a bit of fun putting this together. So I'll just give you a quick chance, and after that I'll be able to jump back through questions. We've taken our time, but I gather you've been looking at some of the questions already, Colleen, which is great. Let's just do this first, and then we'll close, and then we'll go to the other questions. So we've got our answers pretty much coming here. 21 people are looking, 21 people answered. So here are your results. If you think your love for authors is a puddle of mud, you might want to consider changing your perspective a little bit and get your organization to think more about your authors and come up with a strategy for better engagement. So hopefully some takeaway points there. If you've said it flows like a river, you have recognized that there's more you can do for authors. Now act on those intentions and start some new initiatives and improve those pain points for authors. So just keep moving in that direction. And for anyone who said that your love for authors is as deep as the ocean, clearly you and your authors are best buds. Well done. You're doing all the right things, but who says you can't come up with something even better? It's time to think outside the box, which, as I move over, leads us to the next. One of the questions I had is about innovative author experience initiatives. What have you guys seen that is really cool that you think others could do that is thinking outside the box?
I'll move quickly, and just Romy, there's a question in the chat about the publisher society relationship that I think would be good to answer. I'm going to turn to my two colleagues, my two panelists, I should say. I think David and his colleagues are thinking really smartly about correlation and data. They're very, very data focused and are thinking about the infrastructures required to have better data to understand, if I do this, how does it positively or negatively impact that? I think that that's really innovative and smart. And Rory and his colleagues are really thinking about structuring author communications and messaging and testing it and being much more systematic about it. So I'm calling out my two panelists.
Excellent. So they can't call out on each other.
Damn.
And then I think the other one we all really think is cool, we said last time, was the Company of Biologists. They're definitely very innovative in their marketing approach. They plant a tree, they've got an author community. They're really, I think, they're on the leading edge of being really innovative.
Yeah, so they have this forest of biology. So every author that publishes an article, or every article is being reviewed, they create like a little tree in this virtual, a real tree is planted, but then they also have a virtual forest where you can go and look at your tree. And they've had really positive responses from authors saying, this is so cool, I really want to publish with you. That I think are maybe not directly what they planned at the beginning, but obviously, an indirect result of a great initiative that then leads to other submissions.
So the question in the chat is really about, I'm a society, I work with a commercial publisher, what falls on them versus what falls on me as a society publisher, and noting that sometimes the commercial publishers might make it difficult to change core systems. So I'll start and you'll chime in. Sure. If you work with a commercial publisher, a lot of the system piece falls on them and your role is largely advocating. I think what I would say is, despite that, there's a lot you can do on your end still. You've got communications that you can talk to your prospective authors with. You can arm your editorial teams with ambassador kits and really good messaging. There's a lot that can be done to improve author experience on the association side, even when they work with a commercial publisher. I think that's one. And I think two is, you're not with a commercial publisher forever. You have the right to go out to RFP to figure out which commercial publisher is the right one for you. And these are the kinds of things that you need to be evaluating. What kind of access do you have to data, like data sovereignty? What will they let you put on there in terms of marketing technology? What is their roadmap for fixing the author submission system they use? Whatever it is, we see those things being advocated for a lot more. And so I think use your voice, use your RFP process to move the publishers where you need to move them to. That would be my answer.
I think there's also partnership agreements that are more like somewhat all-encompassing, where the others let you keep your own systems for some parts of the journey. So that might be
100%.
something to look at.
That's true. When you go up for, it's time to look at other publishers. It's a really good point, Romy. You may decide to keep. I know some publishers that keep the submission system separate from their commercial publisher, for example, or insist that they want to plug in this plugin, or some that want their email separate, but everything else is with the publisher. So you have, I think, a little more flexibility here, but it's usually that's done at the initial negotiation stage. Not always, but usually.
Yeah. We got any other questions? This hour's flown by. We're like 2 minutes to close. I think we've talked about most of the things I had written down. We talked a lot about engaging different parts of the organization, from editorial to marketing to production. So I think we touched on that. Is there anything else that you guys want to add as like closing comments before we wrap up?
What I would say is author experience is really broad. It encompasses a lot of things, and as a result, it can be super overwhelming. Start simple. Start by making someone your AX champion in your organization, and get in a room, do a workshop by yourself, get a professional facilitator, however you want to do it, and figure out what you want to do, and then just knock off 1 or 2 small things. Even improving your author instructions is a step in the right direction. You don't have to spend a lot of money on technology. You don't have to be dependent on your publisher to make small wins. There are small wins to be had here. So that's my advice. Start somewhere.
Yeah.
I'd say the sort of the common thread throughout this whole presentation has really just been about communication, right? Setting up feedback loops, ensuring that there's communication between your editors, your staff with authors, ensuring that there's communication between each of the departments. So yeah, I think that should just be the focus first and foremost, is just making sure that you're listening and communicating and responding.
Yeah, and both those points, start small and communicating, will help you be able to scale what you started small with to something larger. And that's really, that's the key, to constantly evaluate what you did here. This made sense at this time. We improved the author experience, but how does this new thing affect that thing that we streamlined? And just talking it through and making sure that everyone's on the same page, know what the goals are, know what the KPIs are, whatever you're measuring, so that you can make constant improvement across perspectives.
There's one more question if we've got time. It's about balancing this person's turnaround times are long. How do you balance being transparent about that and maybe turning away authors because you are transparent about that? David, this feels like a David question.
I don't know the answer. If we knew the answer to that one,
yeah.
It's hard. If you let the authors know that you might have a longer turn time experience, that means all your other processes have to be smooth, have to be streamlined. You might need to handhold the authors more and communicate with them more to negate that turn time problem. Because I think both Colleen and Rory mentioned this personal nature of growing author experience. And so if you know you have a clear problem with one thing, overcompensate, talk with them more. Make their experience so magnificent that they're fine waiting a year to publish, because it's such a great experience and they feel cared for, right? Like you can do a lot with just that.
Yeah. The other
Yeah.
thing I'll add that we didn't talk about is author experience isn't just about authors that are getting accepted, but also those that are rejected. You can have a good experience being rejected if you provide good feedback. Some authors actually, you know, very grateful for that, and they can have a good experience doing that. Equally, you can get accepted and have a bad experience. So that's something we maybe should have mentioned at the start. We did talk about that. I know we're at the hour and people are dropping off because they probably have other meetings. Just wanted to point out, last week we published, Kronos published the Author Experience Beginner's Guide, which has got some tips as well about how to get started and what to look at, with various links, including the ones that Colleen mentioned on the Clark and Esposito side, and some comments as well from Rory, not Rory, from Dave actually. Rory's not in it, but one of your colleagues has quoted in it.
Miguel.
Miguel is, yeah, we ran so many webinars and things, and in January I had this idea to pull it all together, and it grew arms and legs, so I'm really glad it's finally out there. So yeah, please just go ahead and download that and have a look at it. Any comments, welcome, and thanks so much you guys for joining me again to do this one more time.
Yeah, and anybody feel free, if you've got any questions, you can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest way. Always happy to answer them.
We do have another webinar coming up as well about localizing the publishing experience. We're looking at things like multilingual publishing and platform experience, if anyone is interested in that. And next week, if you're ALPSP, I'll be starring in Heather Stain's musical. I'll be singing. So if you're there, that will be so much fun. And as always, please, you know, sign up to the newsletter if you want to be kept informed about other events that we have coming up. Right, thanks so much. Goodbye, everyone.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.